When you stop begging for respect, something strange happens. People who used to disrespect you suddenly disappear. Self-respect is not loud. It doesn't demand attention, and it doesn't try to prove anything. It moves quietly within you, shaping the way you think, the way you speak, and most importantly, the way you allow others to treat you. Many people spend their lives trying to gain respect from the outside world, not realizing that respect is not something you chase. It is something you embody. The moment you begin to respect yourself, the entire dynamic of your relationships begins to shift. Toxic people are highly perceptive when it comes to emotional patterns. They can sense hesitation, self-doubt, and the need for approval. These subtle signals act like invitations, silently telling them that boundaries can be pushed and limits can be ignored. It is not always a conscious process, but it is deeply psychological. When you lack self-respect, you often tolerate behavior that goes against your values. You stay silent when you should speak. You say yes when you want to say no. And in doing so, you unintentionally teach others how to treat you. Self-respect changes this pattern at its core. It begins with a decision, one that is not visible to the outside world at first. A decision that says, I will no longer abandon myself to keep others comfortable. This shift may feel uncomfortable in the beginning because it disrupts old habits. You may feel guilt when you start setting limits. You may feel fear when you stop seeking approval. But these feelings are not signs that you are doing something wrong. They are signs that you are breaking free from a pattern that once kept you small. As self-respect grows, your tolerance for disrespect naturally decreases. You no longer justify poor behavior. You no longer over-explain your boundaries. There is a quiet firmness in the way you respond. You do not need to raise your voice or become aggressive. Your energy itself communicates a message. Access to you is no longer unconditional. Toxic individuals rely on predictability. They expect emotional reactions, explanations, and attempts to fix the situation. When they encounter self-respect, they are met with something unfamiliar, calm detachment. You are no longer trying to win their approval, and this removes their sense of control. Without control, their influence weakens. There is also a deeper transformation happening within you. Self-respect strengthens your inner dialogue. Instead of criticizing yourself or seeking validation, you begin to trust your own judgment. You become less affected by opinions, less shaken by criticism, and less dependent on external reassurance. This inner stability makes it difficult for toxic behavior to penetrate your sense of self. Your presence begins to change. You carry yourself differently, not in a way that seeks attention, but in a way that reflects certainty. People notice it, even if they cannot explain it. Conversations shift. Interactions become more balanced. And those who once tried to undermine you start to feel uncomfortable in your presence. Self-respect also teaches you the value of distance. Not every situation needs to be confronted, and not every person deserves an explanation. Sometimes the strongest response is simply removing yourself. This is not avoidance, it is awareness. You recognize where your energy is not valued and choose not to invest in it. Over time, the environment around you begins to adjust. Those who cannot respect your boundaries drift away, while those who value you remain. It is not something you force. It happens naturally as a result of the standards you set for yourself. You are no longer attracting the same level of behavior because you are no longer operating from the same level of self perception. Self-respect acts as a shield, not because it fights others, but because it eliminates the need to engage in harmful dynamics. It closes the door to manipulation, guilt, and emotional chaos. It is not about becoming distant or cold. It is about becoming aligned with your own worth in such a way that anything less than respect feels out of place. The more you react, the more they attack, because your emotions are their fuel. Emotional reactions are powerful. They are natural, human, and often immediate. But in the presence of toxic individuals, they become something else entirely. They become fuel. What feels like a normal response to you becomes a source of control for them. Every visible reaction, anger, frustration, sadness, defensiveness, confirms that they have reached you, and for someone who thrives on disruption, that confirmation is rewarding. Toxic people are not always seeking truth or resolution. They are often seeking impact. They want to see how far they can push, how deeply they can affect you, how quickly they can shift your emotional state. This is why logic rarely works with them. You may try to explain, justify, or defend yourself, believing that clarity will resolve the issue, but clarity is not their goal. Reaction is. When you react emotionally, you enter their space. You begin playing by their rules, where the conversation is no longer about facts or fairness, but about emotional intensity. They may twist your words, provoke further, or escalate the situation, because the more you react, the more engaged you become. It becomes a cycle. One reaction leads to another, and before you realize it, your energy is drained, your thoughts are scattered, and your sense of control is weakened. There is a subtle shift that occurs when you begin to observe this pattern instead of participating in it. You start to see that not every comment requires a response, and not every provocation deserves your attention. This awareness creates a space between stimulus and reaction, and within that space lies your power. Instead of reacting instantly, you begin to choose your responses deliberately. This does not mean suppressing your emotions or pretending they do not exist. It means understanding that not every emotion needs to be expressed in the moment, especially when the environment is designed to exploit it. You can feel anger without showing it. You can recognize manipulation without engaging with it. You can remain calm, not because you are unaffected, but because you refuse to give your energy to something that does not deserve it. As you reduce your emotional reactions, toxic individuals begin to lose their leverage. Their usual tactics become less effective. The comments that once triggered you now meet a neutral response. The provocations that once escalated into conflict now fall flat. This lack of engagement creates confusion for them, because the pattern they relied on is no longer working. They may try harder at first. They may increase their efforts, become more direct, or attempt new ways to provoke you. This is often a test to see if your composure is temporary or real. But consistency changes everything. When your calmness remains steady, when your reactions remain controlled, the dynamic begins to collapse. Emotional detachment is often misunderstood as coldness, but it is actually clarity. It is the ability to separate your inner state from external behavior. You are no longer absorbing everything that is thrown at you. Instead, you are filtering it, deciding what matters and what does not. This shift protects your mental space and preserves your energy. There is also a deeper transformation taking place. As you become less reactive, you become more aware of yourself. You start to recognize your triggers, your patterns, and the areas where you once gave away your power. This self-awareness strengthens your ability to remain grounded, even in challenging situations. Your presence begins to change in subtle ways. You speak less, but with more intention. You listen more, but absorb less negativity. You respond when necessary, but without emotional urgency. This creates a different kind of interaction, one where you are no longer pulled into chaos, but remain centered within yourself. Toxic people depend on emotional access. When that access is removed, their influence weakens. They are left with fewer ways to engage, fewer opportunities to provoke, and less control over the situation. Without reaction, their behavior loses its purpose, and the connection begins to fade. The moment you say no, without guilt, you become dangerous to toxic people. Boundaries are often misunderstood as walls that separate you from others, but in reality, they are guidelines that define how you allow others to engage with you. They are not about control or punishment. They are about clarity. When boundaries are absent, confusion takes their place. People test limits, cross lines, and slowly reshape your space according to their own needs. Without realizing it, you begin to adapt, adjust, and compromise parts of yourself just to maintain peace. Toxic individuals are especially drawn to environments where boundaries are unclear or inconsistent. They rely on flexibility that benefits them, not you. They observe how much you tolerate, how often you forgive, and how quickly you overlook behavior that makes you uncomfortable. Each time a boundary is ignored without consequence, it sends a silent message that the behavior is acceptable. Over time, what once felt wrong begins to feel normal, and what once bothered you becomes something you quietly endure. Establishing boundaries disrupts this pattern. It introduces structure where there was once uncertainty. It communicates without aggression that your time, energy, and emotional space have value. This shift does not require long explanations or dramatic confrontations. It often begins with something simple, saying no without justification, stepping away from conversations that feel draining, or refusing to engage in behavior that goes against your values. At first, setting boundaries can feel uncomfortable. There may be resistance from others, especially from those who have grown used to your openness and availability. They may question your change, challenge your decisions, or attempt to make you feel guilty. This reaction is not a sign that your boundaries are wrong. It is a sign that they are working. When you change the rules, those who benefited from the old ones will naturally resist. Consistency is what gives boundaries their strength. A boundary expressed once but not maintained loses its meaning. It becomes a suggestion rather than a standard. But when your actions align with your words, something begins to shift. People start to recognize that your limits are not temporary or negotiable. They begin to adjust their behavior, not because they are forced to, but because access to you now depends on it. Boundaries also change your internal experience. You no longer feel the same level of resentment or exhaustion that comes from overextending yourself. There is a sense of balance, a recognition that your needs matter just as much as anyone else's. This balance creates stability, and with stability comes confidence. You are no longer reacting to situations as they arise. You are shaping them through the standards you set. Toxic people struggle in environments where boundaries are clear. Their usual strategies, manipulation, guilt, pressure, lose effectiveness when they are met with calm refusal. They cannot easily push past limits that are consistently reinforced. Without access to your time or emotional reactions, their influence begins to fade. They may attempt to find new ways to engage, but without success, their interest often shifts elsewhere. There is also a quiet power in knowing that you can walk away. Boundaries are not only about what you allow, but also about what you are willing to leave behind. This awareness removes the fear that often keeps people stuck in unhealthy dynamics. You are no longer staying out of obligation or habit. You are choosing your interactions based on alignment, not pressure. Your presence begins to reflect this change. There is a steadiness in the way you communicate, a clarity in the way you respond. You do not explain, or seek approval for your decisions. You simply act in accordance with what you know is right for you. This creates a different kind of respect, one that is not requested, but recognized. Boundaries make you untouchable, not because they isolate you, but because they filter what is allowed into your space. They remove the chaos that comes from unchecked behavior and replace it with intentional interaction. What remains are connections that respect your limits and interactions that align with your values. While everything else gradually loses its place in your life, silence is often mistaken for weakness, as if the absence of words means the absence of strength. In reality, silence is one of the most controlled and deliberate responses a person can choose. It is not about having nothing to say, but about deciding that not everything deserves to be heard, acknowledged, or answered. In a world where people feel compelled to react instantly, silence becomes a rare form of discipline. Toxic individuals rely heavily on engagement. The behavior is designed to pull you into a reaction, to create a loop where your responses feed their need for control. They provoke, criticize, or create tension, not always because they believe what they are saying, but because they want to see how you will respond. Words become tools, and your reaction becomes the outcome they are trying to produce. When you respond immediately, especially with emotion, you give them exactly what they seek. The conversation expands, the tension grows, and the dynamic shifts in their favor. You may feel like you are defending yourself or standing your ground, but in reality, you are participating in a structure that benefits them. The more you speak, the more material they have to work with. The more you explain, the more opportunities they have to twist your words. Silence interrupts this pattern. It removes the expected response and replaces it with uncertainty. When a toxic person delivers a provocation and receives nothing in return, the dynamic changes instantly. There is no reaction to build on, no emotion to amplify, no engagement to sustain the interaction. What was meant to create movement instead meets stillness. This stillness is not passive. It is intentional. It reflects a decision to remain grounded rather than be pulled into unnecessary conflict. Silence allows you to observe rather than react. You begin to see the behavior more clearly, without the distortion of emotional involvement. You recognize patterns, intentions, and repetitions that may have gone unnoticed before. There is also a form of control within silence. When you are not rushing to respond, you are not giving away your position. You are not revealing your emotional state, your thoughts, or your vulnerabilities. This lack of exposure makes it difficult for others to manipulate you. They cannot adjust their approach if they do not know how you are affected. Toxic individuals often become unsettled in the presence of silence. They are accustomed to reactions to back and forth exchanges that keep the interaction alive. When those exchanges stop, they are left without direction. They may try to fill the gap by speaking more, pushing harder, or repeating themselves, hoping to trigger a response. But without engagement, their efforts lose momentum. Silence also protects your energy. Conversations that are driven by conflict or manipulation can be exhausting. They pull your attention away from what matters and keep you focused on something that offers no real value. By choosing silence, you conserve your mental and emotional resources. You decide where your attention goes rather than allowing it to be dictated by someone else's behavior. There is a deeper transformation that takes place when silence becomes a conscious choice. You become more selective with your words, more aware of when speaking is necessary and when it is not. Communication becomes intentional rather than reactive. You speak to express, not to defend. You respond when it aligns with your values, not when you feel pressured to do so. Your presence begins to change. You appear calmer, more composed, and less affected by external noise. This does not mean you are indifferent, but that you are in control of how you engage. People notice the difference, even if they cannot explain it. The absence of reaction creates a sense of distance, a boundary that is not spoken but clearly felt. Silence shifts the balance of interaction. It removes the emotional hooks that toxic individuals depend on and replaces them with neutrality. Without something to pull on, their influence weakens and the interaction loses its intensity. What once felt like a constant exchange begins to fade, not through confrontation, but through the absence of participation. Inner confidence is not something that demands attention or seeks validation. It is quiet, steady, and deeply rooted within a person's sense of self. Unlike external confidence, which depends on achievements, praise, or recognition, inner confidence exists independently of circumstances. It does not rise and fall based on opinions, and it does not need constant reassurance to survive. It is built through self-awareness, acceptance, and the ability to remain grounded regardless of what happens outside. Toxic individuals are often drawn to instability. They look for hesitation, self-doubt, and the need for approval because these qualities create openings. When someone is unsure of themselves, they are more likely to seek validation, tolerate disrespect, and question their own judgment. This creates an environment where manipulation can thrive. But when inner confidence is present, those openings begin to close. A person with inner confidence does not easily absorb negativity. Criticism may still be heard, but it is filtered rather than internalized. There is a clear distinction between what is useful and what is not. Instead of reacting impulsively, there is a moment of reflection, a space where thoughts are evaluated before they are accepted. This process weakens the impact of harmful words and prevents them from taking root. Inner confidence also changes how you interpret behavior. Instead of seeing negativity as a reflection of your worth, you begin to recognize it as a reflection of the other person's state. This shift removes the personal weight from their actions. Their words no longer define you, and their behavior no longer dictates how you feel about yourself. You remain centered, even when faced with attempts to provoke or undermine. There is a certain stability that comes with this mindset. You are not easily shaken by disagreement or disapproval. You do not feel the need to prove yourself in every situation or defend every opinion. This does not mean you lack conviction. It means your conviction does not depend on external agreement. You can stand firm without becoming defensive, and you can listen without feeling threatened. Toxic people often rely on emotional reactions to maintain control. They push boundaries, make subtle remarks, or create tension in order to see how you will respond. When those responses are absent or minimal, their strategies begin to fail. Inner confidence removes the urgency to react. You are not trying to win, convince, or correct them. You are simply not affected in the way they expect. This lack of reaction creates a barrier that is difficult to penetrate. It is not a wall that shuts others out, but a filter that prevents negativity from entering. You remain open to meaningful interaction, but closed to manipulation. This balance allows you to engage without losing your sense of self. Inner confidence also influences your decisions. You become more selective about where you invest your time and energy. You recognize that not every situation deserves your attention, and not every person deserves access to you. This awareness reduces unnecessary involvement in conflict and minimizes exposure to toxic dynamics. You begin to choose alignment over obligation and clarity over confusion. Your presence begins to reflect this internal strength. There is a calmness in the way you carry yourself, a sense of certainty that does not need to be explained. People respond to this energy, often adjusting their behavior without being told. Those who rely on control or manipulation find little to work with, while those who value respect and balance feel more at ease. Inner confidence does not eliminate negativity from the world, but it changes how it interacts with you. It reduces its influence, limits its reach, and weakens its effect. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable, and what once felt personal becomes distant. The external environment may remain unpredictable, but your internal state remains steady, creating a space where negativity cannot easily settle or grow.